In order for our children to be free, we must never allow transparent dictators, non-transparent dictators, to develop weapons of mass destruction.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want some power. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want some power.
I get to walk into the grand Oval Office. Such a fabulous office, by the way.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that.
But I sat at this grand desk where the Roosevelts have sat, other presidents.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that.
Listen, this is a fabulous nation.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want the kind of power that'll revolutionize my life.
They thought we would blink. They thought we would blink. They thought we would blink. If the United States were to blink, the rest of the world will be lulled to sleep.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want that. Now, I ain't interested in all the other stuff.
The record speaks for itself. Our efforts go beyond Afghanistan, as you're beginning to realize.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want some power. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that.
I get to walk into the grand Oval Office. Such a fabulous office, by the way.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that.
It's important for the world to understand that we struggle not just for freedom, but for civilization itself.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want some power.
We will defend the values we hold dear, no matter what the price.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want some power.
Listen, this is a fabulous nation.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want the kind of power that'll revolutionize my life.
They thought we would blink. They thought we would blink. They thought we would blink.
I want some power.
They thought we would blink. They thought we would blink. They thought we would blink.
I want some power.
If the United States were to blink, the rest of the world will be lulled to sleep.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that.
It's important for the world to understand we will defend the values we hold dear, no matter what the price.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that.
Our efforts go beyond Afghanistan, as you're beginning to realize.
I want it, I want that. I want it, I want that.
Listen, this is a fabulous nation.
I want it, I want that. 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 I want the kind of power that'll revolutionize my life. I want it, I want that. 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 I want it, I want that.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another segment of the Grassy Knoll.
And this should be heard, with any kind of good luck, the week of October 22nd. And I know it will be, because I threatened my webmaster's life if he ever disappeared on me again. Now, having said that, we have back with us the all-time leader in shows done, probably going to surpass the legendary Eric John Phelps, and that's Andrew Colvin, author of Mothman 2. How are you, Andrew?
Good. How are you?
Well, I'm just wonderful. I really am. And just to let you know that I'm doing my part to help the North American Union along, I'm sucking down a Corona Extra, so anything can happen.
Well, that's good. We need to we need to even out our economies, so that to maximize profits.
Yeah. Now, all I'm asking is that they would charge for Corona like they do the cheap American beers that Harry loves so much. That would be natural light. And he also made a very good point about Miller High Life. He said it's the only beer that tastes as good or as bad warm as it does cold.
Exactly.
Harry ought to know he's the king of beers.
I like PBR.
Yeah. A Vyzygoth trivia, by the way. In 1973, I was selected as one of 3 people to be in a Pabst Blue Ribbon commercial and full-page ads in, among other things, the New York Mets, what do you call it? Not the yearbook, but the programs for the whole year, which is like somewhat 81 home games. And, yeah, it was pretty good stuff. Pabst Blue Ribbon beer, yeah. That money from that allowed me to go back to college, as I lost my scholarship after signing with Montreal. And it also allowed me to buy my first ever and second only new vehicle, and that would be a Datsun B210. So you signed with the Montreal baseball team at that point? Yeah. Yeah, I signed with the Expos, and I was sent to the old Florida East Coast League, and I played in Cocoa. We shared the complex with the Astros, whose it really was. And then we played Minnesota, and we played Cincinnati, and they shared a complex down in Melbourne, Florida. And then we did some time also in Class A League down in the West Palm. And, I played with a couple of major leaguers. In fact, the guy on my team was Gary Carter, who's a Hall of Famer. And that was kind of interesting because when you go into this, when you're just young, you don't know who's who. When I saw this guy, I'm like, oh my God, he's a catcher, because I was a catcher. I'm like, I'll never play. So they moved me to third base. And, of course, he wasn't usual, which he was, I was glad because I'm saying that this guy's average. I mean, forget about it. So it was nice to have gone along, and have seen those people and had a chance to compete against them. So
I think I played against John Crook at one point in West Virginia. I think he played for Polka, the guy that ended up leading the league in hitting one year.
Yeah, John Crook, who's now doing color for ESPN. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure. But I played 1 year in the minor leagues, which is this. Each state has a team, and they're not affiliated with any pro clubs. They're just state teams that are trying to get. It's all the guys in college who didn't get drafted.
Right, and it's a showcase, yeah.
Any kind of deal, and I played for the West Virginia team for 1 year.
Beautiful. What were you anyway?
I had this habit of always being at the position of that the coach's son also played. I was just.
Were you a first baseman?
Shortstop, actually.
Ooh, shortstop. Ooh. Excuse me.
Pitcher. And anyway, one interesting little getting drafted story is my sister, who's in the book, my book Mothman Photographer 2, AndyColvin.com for that.
You're getting better at this.
He was married. Had they gotten married by then? Yeah. And to a guy who was being drafted by the Reds and Cincinnati Reds, and he was killed tragically at age 17 or 18. And there's a paranormal story to that. Her daughter, his daughter, and her daughter is also in the book, and she's the one who saw Mothman in her bedroom. And she had an incident a dream where she remembered, or she visualized, or saw her parents having sex and having conception.
Conceiving her?
She saw her conception in a dream, got some messages from her dad from the other side, and then told her mom, and her mom verified that the details of the dream were true. She had actually seen back in time somehow to her own birth or her own conception.
That's a visual I probably don't want to revisit myself. Hank and Norma? Nah, I don't think so.
And then a little tangential link to her, because she's the one who was seeing these certain kinds of glowing letters and Greek letters and things when she, in 1973, the daughter, as at the same time as several other authors, and she's a writer, a budding writer, just trying to get her career really going. But, you had Robert Anton Wilson and Philip K. Dick and John Lilly, Jack Serfati, all seeing similar things that year. But one other person who also had things that year was Doris Lessing.
Oh, yeah.
And she just won the Nobel for literature last week. And she's this cantankerous old lady who, you know, is very down to earth. And there was a shot of her on the internet sitting down on her front steps, you know, like a guy, and talking to the reporters, basically saying, I don't care if I won the Nobel, whatever, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I tell you what, I had a British lit class, and her book, The Grass is Singing, was probably one of my two favorites. The other one, surprisingly, was, what is it, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, I think. Oh, I forget. No, To the Lighthouse is a phrase that her father used. I'm brain farting on that one, so. But Doris Lessing, she's still going, huh?
She is. I thought, yeah, I didn't realize she was still around.
Yeah, that book, The Grass is Singing, also is an excellent metaphor for the fading British Empire in the south of Africa. Very well done. Just anyway, Grass is Singing, if anybody's interested. Okay.
I've got notes. I got some random fill-in notes from just things that I wrote down this week, and I've got things that happened in the last 2 weeks, some of which there's some I'd end up repeating myself and having to say, whoops, I said that already. And then there's some stuff from June which we didn't cover, just sort of what kind of happened that month. So, shall I just start with the notes
Yeah, that's my wife. Down? That's my wife trying to get back your number to me. God bless her.
Oh, okay.
She doesn't know that we're talking. Stop it. Anyway, so yes, go for it.
I was listening to heard something about Blackwater, the hearings, and I heard them say that their teams were 34 guys. That the leader of a 34-man team makes $350,000 a year, I think, which is like twice as much as a battalion leader in the military who has many more people under their whatever purview. And I imagine that is really a 33-man team plus the leader, which is, and it just clicked to me that that's a Masonic layout. That's a Masonic. They've actually structured their teams in Blackwater based on Masonic lore or whatever.
Well, and it gets even better in a sense that this does apply, and that is in Masonic lore, and probably also for practical purposes, militarily. Assassin squads go out in threes, and of course 3 is always the number of the craft's assassins. You know, dating back supposedly to the 3 that try to befall Hiram Abiff. So yeah, and of course, obviously, 11 3-man units gives you 33. Probably just a coincidence.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if Mason is actually related, is another one of these Mon words, which is the root for mound. And that word phrase kind of comes from mountain or mound, and the things that ancient peoples thought about mounds, thinking that they're supernatural, you know, bit ovens, you know, to just cook life forms, create life forms. And I'm wondering if the Mason, because if you take the AS out of it, it's MON. I wonder if that very name is, if they are a modern version of these cults that used to study mounds and worship them or whatever.
Well, let me lay this.
You have the word monk, which is which is a Mon word.
All right.
Monastery, monastic. Even the word moon, for the moon. The word mono, meaning one or oneness. Those are all related to, I think, the mounds.
All right, but let me throw this at you, and this may not mean a thing. I just looked up in the Webster from 1972. Mason's etymology, Middle English or French, maçon, I guess, M-A-C-O-N, C-O-N rather, maçon, I don't know, macon, whatever, and then it also talks about Frankish, Mateo, akin to Sanskrit, get this, Matya. Isn't that interesting? Maitreya. All right.
One other thing, well, last week you talked to Chris Knowles. That's an interesting, I got his book.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things he was talking about was the Knights Templar being the basis for Justice League of America cartoons. And that reminded me of someone that I interviewed for my documentary, a woman here in Seattle who worked on me. She's a rolfer, and she caused I don't know what happened, but she worked on my elbow, and it got infected, like, immediately. And I had to take heavy-duty antibiotics, and it really messed me up for a long time. I had some fallout from it that lasted at least a year. And it took a lot of work to figure out how to get my body back. She believed that the Justice League, she was a UFO abductee from childhood and claimed that there's something called the Justice League that's protecting us from the bad aliens. I just thought it was very odd. That whole experience with her was very odd. And her dad, she said her dad was, did I mention her before? She said her dad was on the Senate intelligence. He was a military general or something, and he was involved with advising the Senate on their whatever committee they have for advising the military. They say it all the time. I can't remember it right now.
For Armed Forces?
Yeah, Armed Forces subcommittee, maybe.
Uh-huh.
And I guess he's retired now, but that's an interesting thing. Like, is the military programming their own family members, to believe in this Knights Templar stuff in sort of this odd way, using UFOs now? That's a good question. It seems like they are.
After, and I will be quick about this, after we had a little discussion about Millennium and what that group might actually be, and of course Carter, who is he's pretty well connected, and he did say that he had interviewed those quote retired FBI agents that really weren't retired, and then so that does beg the question, not only across government agencies, the nature of like the FBI, or CIA, whatever, does the military also have, I wouldn't call it a black bag group, but along those lines. And I also want to tell you too, Andrew, we're going to probably revisit Columbine with Zabel and another individual about all that was involved in that situation very eerily with the military, and not so clandestine either. Just people having a hard time believing that this really took place. So, what you were saying about the military, you got to wonder if there is a certain echelon. And let me just, I was going to make this short, right? Let me also add one other thing. Somebody who listens to the show out in South Korea, an American, was in Army intelligence and had some interesting things to say. In fact, he said he wanted to go no further after a certain point because he realized that those who attained that particular level, shall we say, they all knew the handshake. So, yes, very possible.
You guys also talked about the Normans, mysterious Normans, and how the 4 areas they settled are now the most Masonic. And it clicked that maybe Normans, the MAN of Normans may be, a bastardization of MONs. It sounds like Normans, like Northern Mounds.
Sure.
People of the Northern Mounds.
Yeah. And again, I don't mean to interrupt you, but, anyway, I'm not going to preface it anymore.
That's all I had to say about that.
Well, but the thing is, too, even before, and I told Chris this, I think, in the show, even before he brought it up, in straight, like Discovery/History Channel stuff, and in other books, they questioned the origins of the Normans. They just seemed to have popped up. My only question to Chris was, what I'd like to know is where they were, and this is not facetious, I'm serious, where were they during the waves of the Mongol hordes? That's my only question, because nobody seemed to be around to duke them out. They kind of had to just burn themselves out.
And, by the way, Mongols is another Mon word.
Somehow I knew that.
It somehow goes together, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. You're right.
Another note, sandhill cranes, there's this rumor that sandhill cranes were imported into Point Pleasant during the Mothman flap in order to confuse the issue.
By the way, had you ever seen sandhills out by you in West Virginia?
Never.
Neither in Jersey did I, but
Oh, anyway, that's the rumor. I don't know where it came from or what the real basis of it is. Here's one. Turner's Cartoon Network. We talked about Turner. before in the series. He has a show there, which is having a Bohemian Grove episode. This is something Alex Jones reported I thought was interesting. Lucy, Daughter of the Devil, bringing us an episode with a new kind of a Bohemian Grove theme. So Turner is obviously trying to do something with the idea of the Bohemian Grove. I wanted to mention this book. It's called The Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes, Jaynes, is a treatise written in the 60s, a very influential psychology book about how ancient peoples used to regularly have discussions with entities and hear voices in their heads because they didn't yet have a sense of internal dialogue. So the dialogue had to always come from outside. But this was an accepted thing. And he actually sort of comes around to saying that it's a good thing in a way because, and he's one thing he said is it's harder to study that phenomenon today because there are less people hearing voices because the drugs that they give in mental institutions, get rid of the process. But he thinks the hallucinogenic process is a good one because it allows people to integrate information and start to get closer in touch with that. It starts to heal that split, you know what I mean? By he found that patients that were having hallucinogenic experiences were actually the most well-behaved on a norm. If they weren't doing drugs and they were having these, they were the most. They were getting something out of it. They were getting some healing thing from it. And the patients that weren't were the ones that were the most difficult the most dangerous and so forth. So that's an interesting take on it. He studied the Odyssey and some of the old texts and found evidence there that, the ancient Greeks were very much like that. They had, their brain was split in two, or the two sides were more separate than they are today. And as we've gone along, we've become more integrated as a whole in our thinking. We can speak to ourselves inside of our heads now and say, yes, today I'm going to go do this and this and this. We don't have to have, a Mothman standing outside the door telling us what we're going to do today. We can just think about it ourselves. And so that kind of goes along with my theory along the way here that when people have these experiences, they are at a crisis point where their consciousness needs to advance a little bit. A lot of people that I interviewed described that they were in a good versus evil point in their lives. They were deciding, what to do next, and they couldn't decide. And that's when they have the vision or the experience with Mothman or whatever. Any thoughts on that?
No.
Okay.
Well, but
I'll move on then.
Okay.
Next note is hero. The word hero is that Chris Knowles mentioned is the same as Horus. I think he mentioned that.
That's right, you did.
Which, Horus being a birdman, and I've always said all along that Mothman, to me, is a superhero character, a crime fighter, and it just fits in. The whole thing fits in that hero would come from Horus. The monk that I mentioned, he wrote the book about Garudas, Samudranath. His last name is Morin, and MOR words are very related to MON words. And he kind of has both. He has a Moor name and an Amon name in a way, because he had, Morin is, it's just odd. It's odd that he would have a name that really kind of slides right into that slot of Mound culture. But I can't find the guy. I've been trying to locate him for an interview, and he seems to have disappeared. His publisher hasn't heard from him in years now, apparently.
That's not a good sign.
Not a good sign. And I was wondering about the name America, if that's not an MER word related to the MON. And Peter Moon talks about all the reasons why they're connected. I can't go into it right now, but MOR, MER, MON, MEN, like the word Amen in a way means on top of a mound. But America might be Amorica. It might be, a slight bastardization of an earlier term. You never know.
But tell me what the root would be then.
Well, Moor. America sounds like a Moor. It could be a Moor name, like the whole country was a Moorish country, which is one of the theories here, is that America was settled by Northern Africans prior to the Indians, or congruent or whatever with the Indians.
One quick thing, if I could, and that is one of the things I've never had. I don't follow this, but there is talk about both Phoenicians and Roman sailors having reached the Western Hemisphere. That there was a Roman ship that was sunk off the east coast of South America. Then there's all this talk about, I guess, Egyptian artifacts and such in certain places, supposedly of Cairo, I guess as they call it, Illinois, which is at the confluence of the Missouri and the Mississippi. Have you ever heard any of that?
Have I heard about the Phoenicians reaching Cairo?
Well, first of all, reaching the Western Hemisphere, and secondly, perhaps the Phoenicians or some Saharan.
Yeah.
You have.
Well, that gets pointed at too and hinted at a lot in various ways. But it could just be that some Masons who were steeped in Egyptian lore, named it Cairo. Cairo means Mars. It refers to the planet Mars. Translate it, which is another MAR word.
Well, this was years ago. This is like 2000, I don't know. I was having a real problem sleeping every night. And I used to put, in those days, the Walkman on in bed, so I didn't wake my wife. And I would listen to pretty much coast to coast, maybe a little Jeff Rentz, I'm not sure. And one of them was talking about being on the threshold of uncovering Egyptian artifacts in some caves at that location, which makes you wonder if Mark Twain didn't know something was going on too. But somehow, I didn't follow the story, never heard anything else about it. And, it was tied into two prison guards who got information about this and went in and found a treasure trove. But I never heard anything. I don't know if it's big hoodoo or whether, in fact, it is the truth. Do I have a problem with those peoples being able to make it across the Atlantic Ocean? No. And that, historians and anthropologists for their own little bailiwicks might want that not to get known. I can understand that, too. I just wish
the Chinese were here, too. The Mongols were here, too.
Well,
Well, they were more on the West Coast, so. But that whole area definitely has a strong Masonic thing going on. I know that, near there you have Alton, Illinois, which is right above St. Louis, where you have the Piazza. A lot of people are seeing a Mothman-like creature there, which actually looks like Asimov, the three-headed alchemical dragon. And Asimov, I've speculated, is another way to visualize the Mothman. And of course, it's interesting because the last part of his name is M-O-T-H, Moth.
But isn't there also out there in Illinois, Western Illinois, an area that I think is a state park, if not I don't think it's a national park, but it's full of what you could call mini pyramids, earthen but mini pyramids.
Sure, yeah. And I think that was, that valley, the Mississippi branches off at Alton to the Ohio. That's where the Ohio comes in, near there, not right there, but fairly near there. And so that's a big area, I would think, for settlement way back. And I think, they like to take, when they really wanted to go into the boonies, they went up to Ohio to the Kanawha, and up the Kanawha, which was called the River of Death, to leave their dead up there at Mound where I grew up.
Okay, you know what? I must have misspoke too. It isn't the confluence of the Missouri and the Mississippi. You just said it. It's a confluence of the Mississippi and the Ohio.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that.
That's got to be an old area of. Although I know the Ohio's route was changed somewhat during the Ice Age, so it may not be the. I don't know if the confluence is the same. It might still be the same, and maybe some other part of the Ohio was rerouted.
And also, you have, again, a very strange topographical feature, perhaps not mystical, but still in all, and that is on the east bank of the Missouri, which is the western abutment of Iowa, with the famous bluffs after which Council Bluffs was named. That's another interesting place also. And of course, again, as you had said, the Mississippi has done a couple of twists and turns, so that it's changed its directions a number of times and actually cut off what was part of Iowa, and now it's considered Nebraska. And I forget the name of it. It's Carter Island or something like that. But anyway.
I got an email from a guy I got an email from a guy who was from Alton, who said, he sent me some links and stuff. And then I also immediately got a little synchronicity, an email from Bruce Adamson, the JFK assassination researcher, talking about Alton, Illinois. And that it was founded by a guy named Alton, who was the first postmaster of St. Louis. And there was a bunch of strange stuff going on, conspiracy stuff that somehow, if you followed the trail back, it linked to the Lincoln assassination.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of the angle that the reason why maybe we were seeing the Birdman there is there was some funky conspiracy stuff going on, linking some of these older assassinations to these newer assassinations that Mothman was prophesying about.
Well, what Charles D. Wilcox writes about in The Transformation of the Republic, and we talk about this every so often when he's on, and that is how in the world do people out in Illinois and Wisconsin have a day's prior knowledge that Lincoln was not going to be assassinated, but was assassinated. Of course, he had not yet been, but the thing is, it was a slam dunk. So how did they know that throughout Illinois and up into Wisconsin? So that's what you might be referring to, and that is extremely interesting.
Yeah. Another little note, Indrid Cold, the man in black, I was talking to Greenfield, and we've kind of narrowed it down where Indrid Cold was from, or where he was living, and it appears to be Beckley, West Virginia, a little town outside of it called Midway. And interestingly, that is where I was filming last month when I went back. I didn't actually go to Midway, but I was in Beckley. I did 2 hours of filming in Beckley. And it was one of those things where I was driving to Beckley, and I'm thinking, why is the Mothman stuff happening here in Beckley? And it just seemed, but that's been that way throughout the series, and I just follow it, and it turns out to have some meaning later. But that's a potentially big piece of information. We could actually find out more about Indrid Cold and what he was up to. Next one. There's this rumor being thrown around that Werner von Braun saw the Roswell crash and the aliens from the crash. I don't know if you saw that, but the guy that said it was a NASA shuttle Columbia member named Clark McClellan, and he's claiming that von Braun told him this. And it's kind of one of those things that I think it's a piece of disinformation, but it oddly, a lot of times when people throw out disinformation, they actually don't realize that they're giving out something that's a piece of information that conspiracy researchers can use. Because I do think, von Braun was hooked into the disinformation campaign about UFOs and may have been involved in the abduction phenomenon. I mean, because if anybody was, it would have been NASA security, and he was the head of NASA security. So if they were abducting people and making people think they were, had gone to Lanulos or Venus, it would have been probably under his watch.
Hey, Andrew, do you know, who owns, or if it's a government installation, the Jet Propulsion Labs? Is that government? Do you know?
Well, I think most of them are government. They're an odd blend. That's the key. You know, the Rockefeller style is to make sure that it's so convoluted that the money can flow quickly from the public coffers to the private coffers.
Well, then, in other words, it wouldn't be all that much different between, something like JPL and also Raytheon.
I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, it has to be private. It has to be private for them, or else it wouldn't be such a huge ongoing organization. If people weren't milking it for profit, it wouldn't. It would just.
And I guess you have to also go through the phony bidding process,
Yeah, well, the whole national labs thing is very odd. The way they've got the national lab system set up. The labs are being funded by the government, but they're being run by Carbide and Battelle and these companies. So, it's just this model of. It's very similar to the Soviet model, actually, but no one wants to admit it.
That's rich.
It's what Chomsky calls the what is he? The name's not. It's the economic model that Chomsky talks about. Not coming to me for some reason. But it's corporate. Corporate? It's like it's corporate welfare, but it's another way of saying it.
You're not talking about corporate fascism or anything like that.
It's a system set up for public subsidies for private profit.
Also remember something too, and just what you said. In the book Towards Soviet America by William Z. Foster in 1932, I've talked about it a lot here. He was at that time he was like second in charge of the Communist Party in America, and he writes his book in 32, and in it he foretells what's going to happen. How can he know that? But it was through Roosevelt's regime where America got federalized. But he laughed and said, you guys laugh at the Russians for Sovietization, and guess what's happening to you? But you guys call it federalization, and that makes it okay. So there you go. It's absolutely true. They just named it something else.
Yeah, it's bugging me that I can't remember that phrase. But anyway, I'll move on. Carlos Castaneda was, he's pretty influential. His books have been influential. I read them all when I was young, and
that was pretty campy 70s stuff, yeah.
And try, you can try some of the techniques in there, and they kind of work. The thing where you look at your hand and you practice lucid dreaming. And in fact, I did that. I was doing that in '86, practicing that technique, and was being successful at it. And I mentioned it to Richard Linklater, and he ended up putting it in the Waking Life movie. There's a scene in there where the guy looks at his hand, does that, and then flies out of the house and goes south toward Austin, and that's exactly what I had described to him. And it even looked like the house that I was living in at the time.
Well, we got that email from a listener to our shows who had a connection with Castaneda's wife.
Well, yeah, that's what I was just going to mention, that right. Castaneda's wife lives in West Virginia now, and apparently is from there. And I'm still trying to figure out which wife it is, because there's several women out there with books about him. And
wasn't he prolific?
So I'm not sure which wife it was yet. But I am interested in finding out which one she is and where she's living.
All right. They also mentioned in an email his preference for the spelling of his last name. I didn't check this out, but apparently, what is it? The etymology is that it means spider?
Yeah, and there's a Carlos Castaneda who was who I saw him. I somehow I found a link to him, a story about him, which I can't remember the details of. But he was connected to the UN or something.
All right, let me ask you something too. In symbology, as it relates to the animal realm. Is spider necessarily, mostly, or always associated with something evil or dark? I mean, in your experience, if you can't speak to it, that's fine. I'm just curious whether or not, having done the work you've done, whether or not that ever has come up.
No, not really.
Okay.
I do have a photo in my book that I took in France where it says on the wall, "Spider is dead." And and for some reason in my mind it relates to the JFK assassination because they had a French guy. If you watch that one Turner documentary, supposedly they brought over a French guy who shot from the manhole, and I think his name was the Spider.
All right, we're not talking about Corsicans. We're talking about someone that's French. I'm just asking you to.
The guy from Marseille, the hitman from Marseille. I don't know if he was Corsican.
All right. And this doesn't necessarily refer back to whoever the jackal was either, does it? Because he should have been at least dead or gone away by the time of Kennedy's assassination, I think. I'm not sure. Because he was associated with the attempts on de Gaulle, and I can't really believe if he really missed, that he, kind of like missed.
Right. But they brought him through, the interesting thing is they brought him through Mexico City.
And who was there?
Mexico City was the hotbed of CIA activity then.
Where Oswald was also seen.
I'm sorry?
Where Oswald was also seen.
Yeah, and Marilyn Monroe had some weird things happening to her down there.
Well, she didn't have to go to Mexico City for that, but anyway. Another thing, also, the reason I bring up the spider thing, and that is Ian Fleming, who obviously was very plugged in, MI6, obviously used the spider as the symbol for the bad guys, which were known as Spectre. Also, in the movie, Don't Do the Traffic. And I have a photo up in my Fiasco Photos has been renamed on Vyzygoth.com. It's called Entertainment Predictive Programming. Because a lot of people never went there thinking, like, what's Fiasco Photos? But that's where John Valentini's assortment and collection of pre-9/11/2001 9/11 shots in movies, some possibly coincidences. That's where I'm going with this in Traffic. This is the one that can't be a coincidence. In the movie Traffic, they open up the back of a step van, and in that step van, the whole thing is completely loaded out with boxes, all the same size. And on every single one of those boxes that you can see in this particular clip, it has two stamps. One is of a spider, and the other is 9/11. Now, what in the world was that about? That can't be a coincidence. To have a movie like that prior to 2001 come out with all that. So I just bring that up because of, the somewhat, I guess, nefarious association we have with spiders and such like that. And, of course, it's being one of the two tattoos on these boxes in the movie Traffic.
Well, at the very least, it's this leakage that I've talked about, where these events leak out in the artworks of people, because artists are more, I think, sensitive to that stuff. I mean, if it's not an outright provocation, it is a leakage of some kind.
And this is not what this is about, but I'll say this, that nobody has to know exactly what's going on except one person to get these kind of like winks and nods in movies. I'm not saying that, the director was involved in it. I'm not saying the actors were involved with it. But, I mean, all you have to have is somebody who says, look, on these boxes, I want this, these props are going to be tattooed with this. That's what I want, and somebody goes out and does it. But whoever commands that is somebody who knows what's going on, so.
Oh. Well, speaking of 911, General Electric is making the new airport shoe scanners.
Holy Christmas.
The shoe scanners have been brought about by that whole fake shoe bomb thing.
Oh, with that idiot?
The guy whose last name, his middle name is Colvin, by the way, Richard Colvin Reed.
You probably could have left that out, Andrew, but that's okay.
Yeah, whatever.
I mean, did you look at that guy? He looked like, the hippy-dippy weatherman. I mean, it's like, where did you get this guy? Out of the ocean?
Yeah. So GE is making all kinds of money in different ways from the tragedy. AT&T saw a thing where they were behind something called Natural Voices, which is a voice cloning software. Let you know that the Rockefellers have been interested in manipulating voice messages for a long time, and it might explain why John Keel was getting such weird phone calls, some of which seem to sound like him.
Well, what even about the voice prints that, I believe were used in these pseudo-conversations, or whatever you want to call them, between, quote, Todd Beamer and Lisa and, quote, Jeremy Glick and Lisbeth Glick You know, every time I watch the Weather Channel, you know, and it comes up to your weather, and you hear that same voice, which is the same voice you hear in Washington State, the same voice you hear in New Jersey. The weather for today, the temperature is 69. I mean, it's the same guy's voice for all the Weather Channel, and how do you think they do that? So this bit about voice replication, whatever, and the Rockefellers being involved with it, you know, I mean, I don't know if I'm going too far afield in here, but I mean, it is not at all a stretch to say that you can have a fake conversation with somebody who sounds exactly like, you know, your spouse or your sibling. Mm-hmm. I mean, Andrew, I mean, you got anything on that, or?
Well, you would think that if they were going to do the Todd Beamer, try to pull something, they would have done a better job with the things that are actually said, because that whole story falls apart under the least bit of scrutiny. You know, the whole cell phone thing.
Yeah, that does. But you know, the one that bothers me,
it's not possible that stuff happens.
All right, the one that bothers me though is this Elizabeth Glick one that she's gone on and on about, and reprise what happened in that Reader's Digest summer 2004 issue, where she changes her story and says, no, it wasn't on a cell phone, which she said on 9/11. It's in the Times. I talked to him on a cell phone, 35,000 feet. Then the story changes 3 years later when it pops up in Reader's Digest, and it's like, well, okay, Elizabeth, which is right?
Yeah.
But now, did she really talk to somebody? Because, you know...
Well, it turned out that they actually didn't have any backseat phones on that plane anyway. So there really was no way for her to have made it.
Well, boy, where did you find that? Because I tell you what...
Unless I'm confusing that with one of the other call things.
Well, you got the other one with Flight 77 with, what's-her-face, Olsen's wife, Barbara. And now she's on a seatback phone in the back doing a yada-yada. But again, here's the problem. How far back are you? Because those cords only go so far, so you don't, like, obviously, clothesline people coming down the aisle.
Yeah.
So you can't be stretching that sucker back to the bathrooms. The whole thing stinks. But, I mean, going back to what you originally said, you know, voice replication, you know, and whoever was behind it, and I'm sure NSA is really good at using that hardware.
Here's my next note. This is an interesting little thing involving a couple of things we've already talked about. I've been editing the next book, which is, well, I was going to say it was around the time of Grassy Knoll 12, but it wasn't in Grassy Knoll 12. It was a fellow that I interviewed right next to that part in the next book. It's where it's going to be. They're going to be side by side or whatever. And his name is Kenny Alton. He's a guy that had some premonitions of 911 before it happened, and he's had several kinds of things, odd paranormal things happen in his life. And I was interviewing him, and he mentioned that Manus, M-A-N-U-S, another Mon word, is the root of the word humans. So the very name for us comes from a Mon word, and it means to reflect. And it kind of goes back to this experience we had in 2002, where we went back to the spot and we saw this curtain of energy or something, and it seemed to be reflecting our images back to us. And so not only do you have, I think, a psychological component here with just reflection and what I was talking about with Julian Jaynes, now we're doing more reflection as we evolve. Through each cycle of evolution, we become more reflective. But there's also a physical component to it, I think, in the sense that you can actually go to spots where your consciousness will be reflected back to you. And I think that is part of the reason why we evolve. Each time that we do evolve, it's from Earth energy interactions. But it's interesting. It's interesting that his name is Alton.
And that goes back to that Illinois situation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. I mentioned Doris Lessing. I saw an interesting movie called Howl's Moving Castle, Howls. That is an animation. It has, the castle actually looks like the alchemical dragon Asimov. And the main character, whose name is Howl, is basically a Garuda. And this is a popular movie that came out 3 years ago, maybe. I highly recommend it because it's really good telling of the Garuda story. And it has a lot of the things that I've talked about going on in it. the DC Sniper. Some stuff. They recently, CNN aired a show this last week, and I thought it was interesting, the timing of it. It was called The Minds of the DC Sniper, or The Minds of the DC Snipers, and I think it's connected to the pullout that we're seeing going on now, which I predicted a couple of months ago because I had just happened to hear that a Deutsche Bank team involved with Blackwater had shut down, and I figured that they would go through all these ruminations to make people think that they were, backing out because of public pressure. But I don't think it's that at all. I think that they've just decided to go elsewhere, and the money's running out. But the reason I think they started bringing the sniper back in is because the sniper started the whole thing, because he was there to make sure that Congress voted for the war. So I think they're creating a psychological. It was part of the whole drawdown to bring them back again and tell their story with all these bogus details. Like, for instance, they have Muhammad's wife saying that the whole thing was about killing her. So she actually brings up the specter of random shootings in order to do a hit, which is really what happened. But it was off to kill Linda Franklin, right? The DC Sniper was. I think the whole idea was to kill Linda Franklin and maybe somebody else.
You talking about the FBI woman?
The FBI terror critical of Bush, the whistleblower.
And what was she? Was she somebody who was pumping gas at a station or something like that?
I don't remember. Yeah, I think so.
All right, yeah, I'm trying to jog my memory. Okay.
Yeah, but so White turns it around what is really the truth, and makes it and claims that it has to do with her instead. So domesticizing the situation, making it. Taking all the juice out of it by turning it around. Yeah, but that was really clever of whoever is behind this this whole thing.
Well, what if this is double clever? What if that is baloney too for public consumption? When the two of those cats, or at least one of them, was MK Ultra anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think they both were. I don't think either one of them did it. In fact, I mean, they in this special they showed a brief clip of Muhammad in jail, and he looks to me like he's innocent. I'm sorry, I think you can often tell by looking at somebody, and he's definitely claiming his innocence in this.
Well, two things.
But it may be that he's got a split mind and he can't remember doing it. I mean, it could be that too.
Well, that's what MK Ultra is about, is it not? Is compartmentalizing multiple personalities, so one doesn't know what the other one was doing.
But they saw so many white vans with white guys in it that I think those were the guys who were actually doing the shooting.
I know. I mean, we watched live one time. I-95 backed up to Gazangi going northbound, and they were pulling everything over that was white, vehicle-wise. Yeah. Okay, and they did this time and again with the MO of the vehicle, and then these guys wind up driving this rust bucket, early 1980 Pontiac or something like that. Jeez. Yeah. And I mean, one other thing, Andrew, I'm sorry, but one of the things that Harry and I said during all that, and I mean, honestly, with profiling definitely going on, and I don't know how much you know about what was going on in the Northeast, but it's pretty easy to understand, especially New Jersey. If you're driving I-95 and you got two brothers in a car that doesn't look necessarily like the most kept car, guess what? They're on the side of the road with a trooper's ass sticking out of the back seat. You know what I mean? Yeah. So how do these guys do all this shooting, drive all around the Metro D.C. area, and not once get pulled over? Plus, they had no back seats in the vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah. And you could tell the whole story the whole special was really scripted and bogus. They even had Mildred, his wife, dressed up with a Muslim headdress.
There you go.
But I think she works for the FBI. I know she works for a D.C. agency. I think it might be the FBI. Somebody might want to check on that. Her name's Mildred Muhammad, and she's got this organization called AfterTheTrauma.org.
Right. Well, what about the fact that Moose, right, the sheriff, on top of that whole investigation, wound up being in the military in a base in Oregon where Williams was? They may not have been here at the same time, right? But I mean, what's the odds of that?
And this is totally a tangent, but we had a shooting here in Seattle where a guy killed 7 kids. His name was Huff, and it appeared to be a mind control thing that I talked about with you before. He shot a moose sculpture in Montana before he came to Seattle.
A moose sculpture?
Yeah, Moose came. It was just the Moose thing. But Moose is now Lieutenant Moose or whatever. He's now in Hawaii. They basically rewarded him with a job in Hawaii.
You got it.
And he actually made a statement that the real snipers got away. He said it again in the movie, in the special. He of course was hoping that we would believe it was Muhammad he was talking about. But I think he was telling the truth, and I think in his head he knew he was telling the truth, but it's not Muhammad he's talking about.
I think OJ did it.
Yeah. But Mildred and this other lady they had were really pushing the mind control thing so hard, you know. Yeah, John was absolutely a mind controller. That's all he thought about, you know, and all that stuff. I don't know. It was too over the top to be credible, in my opinion. Moving on. We had a Sergeant Robert Dean, or a staff sergeant. I don't know, he's a military guy, a UFO researcher, Robert Dean. He's pretty famous. I didn't know this, but he was involved in this, the quote, Flight 800 UFO investigation. There was an investigator in New York named Ford out there on Long Island who had seen a bunch of UFOs or was investigating UFO sightings around that area, and I guess it had come up in a fire department document or training manual that there had been lots of UFOs falling here and there, and they needed to have certain training to cover that. And then this Ford guy was framed up somehow, and he's now in prison. And this discussion about this erupted on my list, the Mothman Photographer discussion list on Yahoo, which again, people should try to get on there, and we're still getting more people coming on, so it's getting bigger all the time. But this is the same Robert Dean that flew into Seattle at a MUFON meeting that I was at about 10 years ago. Cal Korff was the speaker that day, and he's a debunker who went over and investigated the Billy Meyer Swiss UFO compound, found out it was all bogus, and was giving a talk about it. And they actually flew Dean in a helicopter, emergency trip to our meeting, just to make us to counter Korff and make everybody believe that the Space Brothers were still watching over us. I mean, that is ridiculous. I mean, think about that. A guy risks his life, Cal Korff, to infiltrate this cult, which is a dangerous thing to do because they're not messing around over there, Billy Meyer. And then they fly in a military guy by helicopter to debunk him and make everybody believe that the aliens are real. Think about that. And people were shouting Korff down at this meeting. It was crazy. I decided not to go back into any more of those meetings. But,
by the way, have you ever heard of a character by the name of Michael Horn? Because I had interviewed him about Billy Meyer and the Plagarians. Does Horn's name pop up at all?
I haven't. I'm not familiar with him.
Okay. You don't want to be.
Here was an interesting thing that happened last week. Donald Trump was being interviewed by Larry King. And Trump was saying some negative things about Bush and about how he had destroyed our standing abroad, and Trump goes overseas and nobody respects us anymore, and da-da-da-da-da. And they let him say it once, and then he came back to it again, and immediately they interrupted with a breaking story. And it was about some pedophile in Arizona or something. It was bizarre.
That fits.
Trump is just starting to talk about Bush again, about how we shouldn't be in Iraq, and they cut to this really ugly face of this pedophile, and it replaces Trump's face. Like, they even put it in the same spot. I mean, talk about subliminal manipulation. And they do this all the time. They're doing it more and more and more. And if you pay attention, you'll notice it. They will cut you off. They did it with Rosie when she was going to bring the 911 truthers on to The View. They preempted her with Bush, which I think I talked about last time.
Also, you have another one with Larry King of late, and this comes to me by way of a pretty trustworthy source up in Toronto who was watching, and this may ring a bell. Vicente Fox was on Larry King. And Larry King was asking him some questions about, what about this North American Union? And Fox, basically says what's going on. And fine, that's still on YouTube, I think. If you go ahead and do a, Vincente Fox plus Larry King, you'll see a 2-minute clip when he talks about it, and when he hits really close, Fox will go like, and I don't even know why King even asked this, oh, you know what it was? It was an email sent in. I'm surprised they let it go on. And he goes, well, every time they don't want you to know that it's really going on, they tell you, well, it's down the road somewhere, well, man, that might be in the future. I saw this before with Anne-Marie Slaughter, who wrote the book New World Order. Anyway, you can't find that transcript with that information has been excised from the transcript of that show. So, again, along the lines of what you just said, oh, that never happened.
Yeah, well, they did the same thing with Stephen Colbert in a way. They kept flashing the headline, "Can Colbert be believed? Is he for real?" As he's telling about his dad getting killed in a plane crash, and his 2 brothers. I mean, it wasn't right when he said that, but
you know what?
They waited a short time after he said that before they flashed, "Can he be believed?"
Actually, what I think somebody should do a study of, and that is the psychological manipulation, the subconscious manipulation of what crawlers on all news shows and stuff really accomplish. To me, there's something extremely, extremely subliminal, although they're there to be read.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Another note, the pineal gland and the sex organs are formed at the same time in the embryo and control similar functions. Now, this explains why, as we were saying with Go Rightly, Greenfield and I, that the phenomenon tends to crop up in people's lives when they're deeply in love or breaking up or something, involved with the sex act or their sexual lives. The pineal gland, of course, can cause hallucinations and can plug your mind into the superspectrum in a way that you can see these entities.
Also,
so there's really a scientific, basis for this theory.
That was also Hunter S. Thompson's favorite gland.
Yeah, there was an article in. I'm trying to remember where this article was. I think it was in National Geographic last month, maybe. We have a 911 researcher poisoned by chemicals, and this is what was his name? Shoot, I didn't write his name down. Did I write it down in here? Do you know who I'm talking about?
No. Did he die?
Oh, Graham. His name is Dr. Graham.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, he died. It took him several months of agonizing torture. They poisoned him with polypropylene glycol, I think. Ethylene glycol.
Jeez.
Now,
that's like antifreeze.
I mean, it reminds you of my story with my dad and several other recent stories with, the guy in Russia who got poisoned with dioxin. Mm-hmm. It's a chemical company. And they have to get this stuff from chemical companies. And then the story came out recently. Did I mention this last time? That they have a story came out that they've admitted that they were toying around with the idea of injecting people with radioactive materials during the Cold War. They're claiming they didn't do it. The government's claiming that they didn't do it. Right. But, of course, they did. But that article came out just a couple of weeks ago. I'm trying to remember if I talked about it before with you.
Now, are you saying this is something they did to the...
It came out on October 8th, which was after I talked to you last.
Okay.
Because the Associated Press had a story that they were... So it was on Yahoo and everywhere for a day. That they were, considering using radioactive whatever and to inject people in other countries, of course. But, that... They probably tried it out here a few times.
Of course. When they say they were considering it, that means they did it.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing I was saying about, when Harry was in the service, he always said, if you enlist, then one of the things you enlist for is being experimented on it without knowing it, and he was. Thankfully, what they did with him was rather benign compared with what they've done to other folks. Operation Shad, I think, is also something that speaks to that. But also, what do you think all this Legionnaires was about? And this other crap that goes on. And one other thing, I don't know about you, Andrew, but I tell you, I would never go on a cruise in my life. One of the reasons being is that how come those cruises are so susceptible to these outbreaks? To me, it's the perfect population to try stuff out on because they can't get off and they can't get on for a certain stretch of the trip. And therefore, you can dose them and see what happens. I don't think I'm wrong about that. There's no way I do it. So.
Yeah. An old story that I found was there was a Nazi rally, a neo-Nazi rally in Orlando. Was it? Do you remember that?
No, really? Jeez.
And it was really organized by the FBI.
Who?
The FBI. It was an FBI informant who was. Here, I've got it right here. Oh, I had it right here. What did I do with it? I should have put down more details about that one for people, but it's a lot. There's a lot of examples of that where the FBI informants are involved in organizing neo-Nazi rallies. There was one in Cleveland a couple of years ago, and they ended up tearing up a gas station. Remember that picture that they showed of a mob tearing up a gas station in Cleveland?
No, I don't remember that, but of course, one of the things that people pointed out, by the way, was that the supposed anarchists up in Canada who were protesting whatever that last thing was, I guess the SPP situation, when the military subdued the supposed bad guys, a great photo was taken that just showed that the bad guys and the troops both had the same kind of boots.
Yeah. The reason I brought that one up is because they're always trying to inflame the racial thing, which we've had several examples in the series here we've talked about. And another recent one was this James Watson, this DNA specialist, Nobel Prize winner from England, who's made the comment that intelligence is genetically linked and that blacks are low on the scale. And now he's being forced to back off of that a little bit. But
well, I got an email from a brother up in Atlanta who had written me originally. I guess he had just happened upon Hal Turner's website and his show, which is an absolute piece of crap, and going like, what is with this? And then he just recently emailed me about this as well. He said, I hate to bother you, but like, what's this all about? I mean, well, there'll never be any end to that. And he also understands that if things ever get quiet, they got to do something to stir them back up again, just so all, the little people like us keep after each other and at each other's throat.
Yeah. Well, how much time do we have left on this?
Well, we're over the hour, but if you want to bring it to a logical conclusion, we'll take a break and start with part 2. So you want to wrap it up, or do you want to leave it over to the second part?
Well, I've got 2 more items on my little list here, and then that's it for that list. And
okay, well then let's finish that up. That's cool.
2 items. The first one is Loren Coleman has announced he's now going to write a Mothman book called Mothman: Evil Incarnate. As I've said, each time the Garuda story gets more play and more popular, Coleman is there to try to up the ante and make more people, because he's the one who has the megaphone. He has, he's the one who's always getting interviewed by the different documentaries and so forth. So way he spins this is the way that most people are going to hear it. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, he is out to destroy the reputation of Mothman. He is definitely, and it's so weird because it doesn't make any sense at all. Why would a supposed scientist who claims it doesn't even exist in the first place, the Mothman is just an undiscovered bird that people are seeing, why would he turn around and say that you'll die if you research it? And then now he's starting to say the Mothman is responsible for all these things. He's saying that the Mothman is responsible for the Minneapolis bridge collapse. And that's so bogus because there were no reports of Mothman before the bridge collapse. There's this vague report from one woman after the fact. And it could be someone who's friends with him, because he's often cooking up stories and things. He's got his own newswire. He has, so he makes up stories, writes stories that appear to be written by other people, but they seem to be written by him.
But what's interesting too, though, when I emailed you about this as soon as that happened, when I heard a certain news report, and that is, it's the old workman on the bridge before this happened, like in Point Pleasant. That's what bothers me more than this guy popping off about seeing Mothman, or somebody seeing Mothman before the collapse. The good old workman on the bridge.
Well, I think it was either his mother or his grandmother was committed suicide when he was a boy, and I think it somehow flipped the switch, and he's got this dark fascination and he tries to compensate for that by being, quote, scientific. But he's not really a scientist. He's a social. I think he has a social
engineering.
The people that do welfare. What are
Oh yeah, a master's in MSW.
Social work.
Yeah, right.
Social
MSW.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he somehow twisted that into he's a sociologist or a social scientist, and he's gotten on different cable shows talking about these school murders, school shootings. I mean, think about the weirdness. That's very odd. It's very odd to be doing all these different things. And he was, he's into mind control and the occult and all kinds of things, and he's always on the side of the establishment. So, and I think that this thing about making Mothman out to be the cause of all this is to cover up the truth, because if the truth is that this creature is trying to reveal the crimes of the military-industrial complex, the best way to cover that up and to cover for the military is to say, no, it was this creature that did it. The next item, Death Cab for Cutie is a band here in Seattle, and their lead singer had his hard drive seized at the border because the hard drive has songs on it that he's working on that are political. This just came out today. I know this guy. I know their record label is Barsook, and I've actually done work on the Barsook owner's house, and my wife has sold him the house and all this, and I've been to parties there and everything, and it's just another strange little link to me, really, that I guess, plus it's a big story. I mean, the fact that they're surveilling guys that are working on songs before the songs come out.
Well, maybe they're not surveilling them, maybe they are, shall we say, supervising them.
Well, they are. That would certainly, if you were trying to do something political and they started doing that, it would probably tend to make you want to change your lyrics, I would think. And I don't know if there's any connection, but another woman that we know was on that same label. Her mom was good friends with Dick Cheney growing up. And this woman has a Birdman tattoo on her arm, which I have a photo in the book of. And I asked her, why did you do that? And she says, she doesn't really know. She's to honor her son or whatever, but it just seemed like she didn't. It was kind of an impulse thing. It's almost like, and this isn't really it, but it kind of reminded me of maybe she put that on there, because of the link to Cheney or something, and maybe it's another Mothman clue. But I wonder if Dick Cheney has all of his friends from way back who know him well, if he's having them surveilled. And that's why this guy from Death Cab is being surveilled, is because he knows this woman who is related to Dick Cheney, or is close friends with him. But that's it for me on that page.
All right, we're going to take a break. Coming right back.
All righty.
See you then.
Streets I'll never revisit, and now I have recalled, have forgotten, both one and many. Floating on the wind, too strange for misunderstanding, a familiar ghost, reflected in a pan of water. Essential self, the bodily self, the dream self, the self in deep sleep. The self is conscious, but of nothing but itself. Free from evil, free from old age, free from hunger, free from thirst. No promise, taste a shattered fruit, body and soul falling asunder. Laceration of laughter at what ceases to lose. No promise, taste a shattered fruit, body and soul falling asunder. Floating on the wind, too strange for misunderstanding. The ghost of swarthy feet, gentle records, flame-lick beats. The essential self, the bodily self, the dream self, the self in deep sleep. The self is conscious of itself.